I've been trying to learn more about D&D lore, and MrRhexx here, I think that's how you say his name, is a content creator that some of you guys have recommended I check out. Didn't really know where to start, so I randomly picked this video because it's pretty recognizable, for me at least. Hopefully this is a good place to start with, we'll see.
Today, we're going to talk about one of the most popular cities in Dungeons & Dragons, a city that has spawned multiple award-winning games, novels, and storylines throughout the years, and of course, the namesake for one of the biggest video games this year, Baldur's Gate 3.
So excited to get my hands on this game at some point in the future.
This video is not going to have any spoilers for
once
the
I know,
game
like,
Baldur's
D&D
Gate
lore.
3. This video is about the city called Baldur's Gate, not the video game itself. However, much of what I will talk about today, of course, will be relevant for the game since, of course, the game features the city. But we're going to talk about the city's history, why the city is the way it is, why it is so popular, and why they just will not allow dogs in the city. It makes no sense.
Why?
Or maybe it does. We will cover that too. However, before we begin, a reminder, guys, that my Monster Classes 4 is out, a PDF that I have written to improve your 5th edition experience. Play as a Mind Lord, a Night Tyrant, or a Serpent Folk. They come with racial features and class features, allowing you to play these monsters in the exact same way as you would play a traditional 5th edition D&D class. The Mind Lord has over 36 new psionic spells that you can use, can mind blast enemies to stun them, and can even eat brains in order to abscond with some of their memories.
Maybe a bit more difficult for the DM to manage. The vast
array of eye-beams to cripple or disintegrate those who oppose them, while also being extremely good at using its extreme power of deduction in order to find clues and solve puzzles, as well as having an unnatural ability to formulate plans with a somewhat guaranteed chance of success. And lastly, the Serpent Folk uses its cunning to deceive and poison their enemies. But the type of Serpent Folk that you choose will also change the kind of playstyle that you do. Purebloods are saboteurs who rely mostly on their poisons to do their dirty work, while also gaining abilities similar to that of the Rogue. The Half-Breeds are the frontliners of the Serpent Folk society, mastering weapons and strategy. They're good at determining the power of their enemies and can use Battlemaster maneuvers to enhance their tactics. And then we have the Abominations, who gain access to powerful enchantment-based spells to enthrall and manipulate while also being tough to defeat and powerful of body. Check out my Monster Classes 4 or any of my other Monster Classes at MrRhexx.store. Playing monsters is a lot of fun, and I have added a ton of roleplay help so that you can add them to your campaign without issue, including reasons as to why these monsters might be good-natured or might have reasons to follow a non-evil party. Any purchase directly supports the channel, and of course, it's all crafted and written by me. I don't use ghostwriters or pay anyone to do these designs for me. I make them all myself to make sure that the quality is as high as possible. MrRhexx.store, the link is also on the video description. Thank you all so much, and now on to the video.
Go and support this video, by the way. Link at the top of the description.
This is the map of
Faerun. I don't know why I said it that way.
Now, Faerun is one of the many continents on this planet where Dungeons & Dragons is set. But it is the main continent where 99% of the books, video games, and novels are located. Now, to understand why Baldur's Gate is so important, we need to look closely at its location, and it'll basically tell us everything that we need to know. This area right here is called the Sword Coast. Now, the reason it is named that way is because the land on the coast juts out into the sea in such a way that kinda looks like little blades. Basically, this entire coastline right here is very jagged, and what that does is it prevents ships from being able to safely dock in those areas. But further, some of these coastlines can be as tall as half a mile high, so even if you were to somehow avoid the jagged blades and then find a place to dock, it makes it so that making it up into the land is very difficult, but also constructing buildings like settlements, for example, or any kind of harbor on the coastline is just frankly impossible.
But I'm assuming Baldur's Gate is the one place where you can.
But you can see that this map here portrays that with this little cliffs right here that the artist drew, and you can see that these coast cliffs basically extend for all of this coastline. Now, docking safely is also particularly important on these areas because the Sea of Swords, which is This whole area of water here is extremely turbulent. The sea is rough, the waves are big, and storms constantly form, all of which are enormous threats to sailors. So having places to safely dock is very, very important. And in the case that you do end up stuck on a storm, it is always better to find a place to dock rather than to venture out and continue your travels. Now, it just so happens that there are 2 locations within the Sword Coast where a ship can dock. One is here in Deepwater Harbor on the bay of the great city of Waterdeep, right on the mouth of the river Deserum.
Wait,
and then
Waterdeep sounds a little familiar. Does it have something to do with I forget his name. It's not Will. The mage guy in Baldur's Gate 3. I think he mentions that in his dialogue at some point.
And the other is a few miles deep into the river Kionthar, where Baldur's Gate is located. So, as you can see, the location for both Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate makes them prime candidates to become powerhouses for ship trading, considering that they both are the only locations that sailors can go to on the mainland if they are sailing through this large section of the Sea of Swords. Okay. Now, to be fair, there is also Daggerford right here, and ships can indeed dock there. However, Daggerford never really developed harbors large enough to accommodate a lot of ships. And the river, it's also very shallow, so it can't...
I'm still, like, amazed by all of this. The fact that all of these cities have maps. Like, there's this big giant map already, but each small town has a map where everything is. So... you really don't have to do too much work imagining like where your players are as a player, where you currently are within the universe. It's just so incredible to me how expansive and detailed Dungeons & Dragons is.
Really be accessed by particularly large ships, and so Waterdeep instead would become the main destination for sailors that would sail this far north on the continent rather than Daggerford. But okay, so outside of this pristine and important geographical position on this map, the actual land itself, where Baldur's Gate is located, it's absolute trash. The ground itself is not particularly fertile, and the location is basically set upon a rough inclination, meaning that buildings have to be constructed to accommodate a lot of verticality in the terrain, which is not at all ideal. And to make matters worse, there is a lot of fog in the area. And we will talk a little bit more about the fog later, but the point is, there is a reason why Baldur's Gate did not quite grow as big and prosperous as Waterdeep. See, Waterdeep has a population of about 1.3 million people, while Baldur's Gate has a population of only 125,000 comparatively, so basically 10 times smaller. Now, all these people don't live in the city, of course. In fact, only a small percentage of all of these people do. These numbers just account for the area of influence around the city. So basically, it would include the people that live on the farms and the small settlements within a few miles of the city proper. But in any case, these differences matter a lot, and Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate are tremendously different cities with very different feels. Waterdeep is a city of unimaginable size, the City of Splendors, as it is called. It is the capital of fashion. It has major temples for a large roster of gods. They import machinery from the gnomes of Lantan, so they do have constructs.
Sounds like a really nice place.
The magics that you can find in there are wondrous. I mean, generally, Waterdeep sort of exudes something more of a high fantasy vibe, just based on how rich and populous it is. Baldur's Gate, on the other hand, is grimmier, it's dirtier, it's darker. It is very wealthy, but there is much stronger, say, wealth difference between the rich and the general inhabitants. And the thing is, there are a lot of reasons why this is the case, and it's not just because the land is bad, but to cover that, we need to go and talk a little bit about its history.
Okay. I think with how Baldur's Gate is set up, it probably makes for more interesting stories and potential dangerous situations than perhaps like going to Waterdeep, where it seems to be a bit more civilized and a lot more safe. But I think Waterdeep would be cool to explore, but I could see why Baldur's Gate might be the place if you're looking for adventure.
See, originally, the place where Baldur's Gate is currently located used to be something of a pirate's den. The fog that has always existed on this place was used to great effect by the bandits who used to trick ships who otherwise couldn't see through the fog into going aground. The bandits would aground vessels by tricking them with lights before boarding them and then stealing their cargo. Eventually though, what started as a pirate's den, a place with some harbors, evolved into a real harbor where sailors could pay money to have their ships fixed, have their sails changed, or, hire guides or crew. For a few hundred years, the place grew and grew more until it became a small village of farmers and sailors. Then, one day, a particularly daring sailor that was born in the village decided to make the craziest voyage of its life. The guy was called Baldurin, and he got together a sizable crew and then sailed all the way across the sea. Okay, so the thing about the Forgotten Realms as a planet is that it shares a fair amount of similarities with planet Earth. So if you were to see Faerun as Europe, then Mastica over here could be considered to be kind of like the equivalent of the Americas. Overall, this entire section of lands to the west is seen as mostly unexplored territory filled with riches and the unknown. Even us, as dungeon masters, don't really know much about what's out there. Well, Baldurin wanted to make an expedition to see what he could find out there on the west, and in particular he made it all the way up here to a land called Anchorome. And when he came back, he brought a ship full of riches, stories of great and grand adventures, and of course, many legends about those mysterious lands. Much of this wealth that he brought back is said to have been buried or hidden throughout the Sword Coast, or even under the ground in what is now Baldur's Gate, but alas, a sizable chunk of this treasure was invested right onto the harbor, which again was the place where Baldurin himself had grown. That was his home. So he commissioned a great wall that would protect the city using this newfound wealth.
Is that a Magic the Gathering card? I love card games, but I never actually played Magic the Gathering. Now that I mentioned this, probably both Silver and Cashew, who are friends of the channel, are gonna be like, Zero, get into Magic the Gathering, oh. And I'm gonna be like, oh no, it's gonna cost me a lot of money, which I don't have. Maybe I'll learn the rule set of Magic the Gathering at some point.
The wall was successfully constructed, and the main gate on this wall would go on to be named after Baldurin, since of course he paid for it. So it would be called Baldur's Gate, which of course, as we know, would go on to become the name of the city proper over time. Now, the reason why this gate became important enough to become the name of the city was actually because the walled compound did not actually encompass the harbor itself. See, let's look at this art of Baldur's Gate, where you can see it a little bit more clearly. See, the original wall, the one that was commissioned and paid for by Baldurin, is this one, the one that we call the inner wall. Oh, so if you landed on this harbor with, say, your cargo back in the day, with whatever it is that you wanted to sell, either here or in some other town in the area, you would basically have to enter the walled compound before you could go anywhere else. Thing is, the farmers that would inevitably move onto this walled settlement for protection started to heavily tax any cargo that went in or out of that settlement. So for the sailors or traders or travelers calling this place the Gate started to catch on because it was kind of a big deal. It was a big tax that they had to pay. Passing by the gate mattered a lot to them. So the place got the moniker of the Gate, or Baldur's Gate, which was again the actual name of the gate. So yeah, it caught on as the de facto name for the settlement. But in any case, Baldurin would actually go on to plan yet another expedition onto this mysterious set of lands far to the west. He got himself another crew and then sailed away, but unfortunately he was never heard from again. This sailor, Baldurin, has been the source of a lot of myths and legends, not just because...
Maybe he's still out there, and you could have him somehow appear in a campaign? Maybe?
Because of the large amount of money that he allegedly hid away in many places around the Sword Coast, not just because the city is named after him, but because of how interesting the concept of his voyage ended up becoming for the people of Baldur's Gate. This, after all, is a sailing city, and so sailing into the unknown in search for adventure and wealth just really hit home with the inhabitants of this place, who saw him as an idol, as someone to be emulated. In fact, they respect them so much that they specifically get upset when people call the citizens of the city Baldurans. The demonym for these citizens is Baldurians, not Baldurans. They claim that misusing the founder's name by calling people Baldurans is just a grave disrespect. Now, this here is the coat of arms for the city, and you can see that it is a single ship with raised sails floating across still waters in front of the clear blue sky. Now, the ship, of course, represents the status of the city as a trading hub, but it also represents Baldurin, who is considered to be the spiritual founder of the city. The calm seas here signify peaceful neutrality, and the sky its promising future. Now, we will talk about its neutrality a bit later, but first, to finish up with the important historic stuff about the city, the taxes that were imposed by the gate towards the sailors back in the early days, interestingly enough, became such a burden for the sailors that something of an insurrection ended up happening. The sailors slash pirates slash bandits that did trading with the harbor eventually invaded and took over the city in protest of these high taxes. When this happened, the sea captains actually overthrew those rich farmers and then decided that they would rule the settlement instead, electing four of their eldest and most experienced to rule it. And then in mockery of their position, they called themselves dukes. But even though originally it was supposed to be in jest, it did end up catching on, as things naturally do, and so this ended up becoming, over time, the actual form of government for the city that would grow then from this settlement. So even to this day, Baldur's Gate is ruled by 4 people who basically make all the decisions for the city, and of course, they are called the Grand Dukes. So here we have a second piece of the puzzle as to why Baldur's Gate is the way it is. The first one had to do with the land just being so awful that they basically are completely reliant on trade. The second is that they have a legacy that is built by sea captains who likely were pirates and smugglers, and of course it was them that made the laws. They set the tempo for the culture of what would become the city. Oh, actually, we also do have a third puzzle piece here which has to do with the walls, which you might not think are that important, but they really are. See, eventually over time, a new set of walls would eventually be made to cover the harbor for protection, but then that made it so that now we had outer walls and then inner walls, and the inner walls were never taken down. So basically you had a situation that slowly built up where the rich people of the city would move and build their manors inside of those inner walls, making beautiful gardens, constructing wide, elegant streets, and really just investing all of their money on that area. The rest of the people had to build their houses outside of those inner walls where it was cheaper, even though there was substantially less space, even though the land was even more inclined around the harbor, making construction even harder. So basically a situation developed where the houses on what we now call the lower city are built extremely tight together and with a lot of verticality in order to obtain extra space. So the lower city is this cramped up, claustrophobic, relatively poor section of the city.
For those of you who've seen Arcane or just know League of Legends lore, it's basically Piltover and Zaun. This concept is just gonna keep getting repeated over and over, and I mean it works, and that's kind of how reality is sometimes.
Well, the upper city is this elegant, opulent, expensive, fancy section of the city. Now, as you can see from a lot of these maps, the population of Baldur's Gate has exploded in such a way that the city itself just cannot contain this many people. Many of these people have actually just spilled outside of the walls into shanty towns. Now, in order to prevent the upper city from having its elegance be sullied by too many buildings or too many people within it, they basically made it so that you can only live on the upper city if you already lived in the upper city, meaning that in a lot of ways, the right to live in the upper city was basically inherited. That law alone effectively created a nobility class within Baldur's Gate, since this was a privilege that you could not simply buy with money. You effectively had to be of the right family lineage to have the privilege of living in this luxurious part of the city, though of course, the vast majority of the time, these families also happened to be extremely rich, of course. Though it is worth noting that that wasn't always the case, and there are families in there that do their best to maintain an image of prosperity that is simply not true for them. In any case, these families are called the patriarch families. Now, people are allowed to enter the upper city, of course, even if they don't live there. However, there is a curfew that happens at nightfall where the guards will expel every single person that is either not a patriarch or a servant of a patriarch, further exacerbating that feeling of exclusiveness. To make matters even worse, you have to pay a fee every single time that you enter the upper city. This effectively discourages people from just casually walking in and further spoiling the beautiful look of the wide open streets of the upper city.
They really care about it.
You know, a big reason for this is that it also basically prevents beggars and poor people from making their way inside, because of course they don't want them there. Further, only one gate is allowed to be used by trade and by people, which is the gate called Baldur's Gate, which is the main gate that separates the upper city from the lower city. There are 4 more gates around the inner walls, but those are made exclusively for the benefit of the patriarch, and no one else is allowed to go through them. Oh, and I should clarify, people can also freely use the Black Dragon Gate, which is the gate that leads outside of the city from the upper city. Or you can also come in through it as well, but you would have to pay the very same fee. It is also worth noting that all of these fees that you pay at the gates are erratic and always changing, which has to do a lot with the pervasive corruption of the city, which is going to be my next point. So again...
Well, when the people who decide the rules of the city were former pirates and smugglers, it's not surprising. I'm sure that you could probably use your powers of persuasion, or maybe threaten some of the guards to get past this, but some fantasy worlds seem cool and all, and you want to experience them, but I would not want to live in this kind of universe.
So far, we have 3 puzzle pieces as to why the city is the way it is. I should also mention, to clarify this, the awful sloped terrain is mostly concentrated on the lower city, but also the constant annoying fog that is pervasive on this city is concentrated exclusively on the lower city, thanks to the fact that the lower city has a lower elevation, is of course at around sea level, whereas the upper city is actually substantially higher. But anyways, the 4th and final puzzle piece is the Flaming Fist. The Flaming Fist are the guards, the police, and the army of Baldur's Gate. But the interesting thing about them is that they are, get this, a mercenary company. Baldur's Gate has, for its police force, and as an army, of mercs, a mercenary company. In exchange for allowing the Flaming Fist to have their base of operations within the city, and of course all of the privileges that may contain, the Flaming Fist sell themselves to the benefit of the city at a greatly discounted rate. But otherwise, yeah, the Flaming Fist are an independent force of almost 10,000 warriors that have full autonomy about whatever it is that they want to do. They could sell themselves to another country if they wanted to, say, you know, to fight some war in the far north, or to protect some keep from a siege in some other land. With the only caveat that whatever it is that they choose to do, they cannot go against the interest of Baldur's Gate itself. Now, the way that they go about at least making sure that the Flaming Fist has the best interest of the city in mind, and say, not just try and destroy it or take it over, is that by tradition, the leader of the Flaming Fist always has a seat in the group of 4 Grand Dukes that rule over the city. Now,
a mission is coming to mind here. Keep in mind, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, but I have seen other people playing, like, some bits of Act 1. I think there is a part where there's, like, a burning inn or something, and then there's a bunch of these guys. I recognize the symbol on their armor, a Flaming Fist, trying to save somebody inside there. Maybe that's an important person from Baldur's Gate or something. But yeah, like, the more you learn about Baldur's Gate and this very very specific balance that they have to keep things in order. It seems extremely, like, on the edge. Like, at any given moment, if one person, like, say, a player, enters Baldur's Gate with their own interest, they could tip the scales in either way and change something major about the city. Since it's just so on the tip, just ready to change, ready to tilt over.
This is not a rule that literally exists, but traditionally this has always been the case. Now, it is worth noting that the Flaming Fist do not police the Upper City. The Upper City does have their own watch, and many wealthy families also carry their very own personal guard, but the Flaming Fist does indeed police all of the Lower City and part, let's say, of the Outer City, which are all of the houses and shantytowns that exist outside of the walls. For the most part, the Outer City is not really policed or really guarded, and many terrible things happen out there. It is not really the safest place to be around in the city. But now, the Flaming Fist, being a mercenary company, is not completely beholden to the city, say, in the same way that a guard in Waterdeep would, or a cop in the real world. The city of Baldur's Gate itself doesn't really have much jurisdiction when it comes to individual Flaming Fist members.
Well, here's the scene I was talking about.
You would have to go to the Flaming Fist organization itself, but the organization itself really only cares about one thing, and that is money. These members are not patrolling the city out of the kindness of their hearts, and for the most part, they don't have to worry about the bureaucracy of the city, so logically you do end up with an extremely corrupt police force. They are there for the money as much as a mercenary might take on a job to protect a caravan from one town to another. Ultimately, it is just about the money, and they are in it just for themselves. It also doesn't help that the Flaming Fist hires warriors primarily into their ranks. These are mostly adventurers that seek to retire or members from other armies in other countries. So you end up with a lot of blowhards, people that have spent their entire lives fighting and
very
killing,
big diversity,
and really not a lot of charmers or talkers. In other words, they are not hiring people that have a good aptitude for public support, or those that are good at de-escalating conflicts, or random people from the city that may feel positive about their hometown and might feel that it is their civic duty to protect it. No, instead, they hire warriors and fighters, and warriors and fighters are what they get. So again, outside of the Upper City, they have guards that are mean-spirited, corrupt as all hell, quick to lose their temper, and show a lack of care for the very same city that they are indeed supposedly meant to protect. In total, it is estimated that the Flaming Fist mercenary group has around 6,000 members, though the lore states that a bit under half of that is stationed in Baldur's Gate, while the other half would be then spread around all of the fortifications and contracts that the organization has all around the continent, which of course includes Chult, as the Flaming Fist does indeed have a big fort in the Chultan Peninsula, which you can actually visit while playing the adventure Tomb of Annihilation. But now, when we put all of these puzzle pieces together, we do end up with what I said closer at the beginning of this video. Baldur's Gate is a dirtier, grittier city than perhaps some of the ones that you might be accustomed to, such as Waterdeep, for example. Unless you're in the Upper City, at which point it is everything that you may have wanted and more, but otherwise,
seems like a much better place to live.
It is a city of terrible wealth inequality, corrupt guards who are also prone to violence, and very interesting architectural layout. If you ever plan to play a grimdark...
I recognize this dude. The guy on the right. I think he's in Baldur's Gate 1. I have a feeling that he was talking about his hamster or something. I haven't played 1. I just know a meme or something about it. He seems very familiar. The hamster is very cute, though.
Style adventure, Baldur's Gate would actually do amazing at it. See, in the Lower City, all of the buildings are made out of stone. There is a constant, pervasive fog that can make it very difficult to see sometimes, and people can actually get lost on the city thanks to it. There are literally guides on the city whose entire job is just to guide people from one end of the city to the other, because it can be hard to see through the fog, and again, the city is kind of a labyrinth as well. Now further, it rains all the time in Baldur's Gate, so the city can showcase a somewhat depressive feeling as one walks around its stony, wet floors through the fog.
This is the opening animation for Baldur's Gate 1, yeah? How do I know this? I don't know how I know this. What video did I see? Was it a video that Josh Strive Hayes did? I think he did a video on was it any good for Baldur's Gate. Maybe I put that on in the background while I was editing. But I recognize this.
Further, because of the constant rain and the salty fog, the lore states that it is very rare to see colorful landmarks, as the ever-present damp discourages the use of banners, open shops, and the like. So, outside of the upper city, where you do have this area called the Wide, which is like a massive market, in the lower city, there are no open shops or many vendors really at all that walk around. Everything is inside. Then, to make matters worse, the damp atmosphere also creates mildew and mold, which is a severe problem on the city. And
I
to
could not
compound
survive there.
all of
I would
that,
just die
because so
from
many
that.
people build their houses on such a small amount of land, and because the terrain itself is on erratic inclines, there are a fair amount of buildings constructed over other buildings. There are passageways that goes under small bridges or small tunnels, and the actual streets are so thin sometimes that they're only meant to fit like 2 people walking shoulder to shoulder, sometimes even less than that. All of this fomented a type of culture that actually reinforces a heavy dislike of, I don't know, fun, I guess? It's hard to put it into words because of the way the city is constructed. If you were to be drunk and obnoxious, say like in a bar, it is likely that many people would actually hear you be obnoxious since everything is just so close. But further, if a drunkard were to like vomit on the street, everyone would have to walk over it because the streets are so small. There's also no space to create parties, but even if there were, there's houses everywhere, and any kind of noise would be heavily disliked by everyone else in the immediate area. Now, of course, not all sections of the lower city are exactly like this, but this can indeed become a recurring theme in many of its areas. So overall, drinking in general is just not a positive thing anywhere here in the city, and people hate those that disturb the peace. All of these things combined are also the reason why there are very strict limits on the types of animals that are allowed inside of the city. Basically, the law states that nothing...
He was mentioning that dogs aren't allowed in the city. Oh, that's so sad. But after this explanation, I can kind of maybe understand why. Don't like the noise, don't need any dirtiness in the streets. Yeah. I think you can actually get like a dog companion in Baldur's Gate 3. So it's gonna be kind of interesting once you do finally reach the city. I don't know what happens, but ain't no way I'm giving away my dog.
Bigger than a peacock can enter the city walls. The reasons for this varies, but generally there's just no space for mounts on the lower city, just because the streets are so narrow. But the main other reason is for cleanliness. Horses, of course, would defecate all over the street, but not just them. Dogs, for example, would have to pee somewhere. Look, if you have been in New York in real life, you know that there is piss everywhere, and to be fair, some of that comes from humans. Okay, maybe most of it comes from humans, but without grass, animals just, they have to go to the bathroom somewhere, and there isn't that somewhere inside of the walls. Even small animals, such as chickens, would be severely restricted, and might even get you in trouble just because of how loud they are. The only exception to this rule are cats, of which there are many in the city. Cats, of course, notoriously avoid defecating on public property, which is a bonus, but they also clean themselves, and more importantly, they kill rats. It's not necessarily that the city has a massive problem with rats, though likely it would be if it wasn't for all the cats, but rats can be a problem which lets people soften their hearts for the felines of the city. Cats are also extremely popular mainstay on the ships that dock in the city, because of course, even ships suffer from rats, so natural.
I'm sure this is like a real life thing too, in these kind of harbor cities, and I guess on ships as well. Like rats getting to the supplies on your ship would be absolutely devastating.
Many of those cats that travel on these ships inevitably do end up in the city in one way or another. So at this point, it is just an understood fact that cats are okay in Baldur's Gate. And so, yeah, I think Baldur's Gate truly encompasses that evocative feeling of a medieval city that looks like this. There is a grittiness to it that I really like, and that I think sells itself as a great Dungeons & Dragons location, but did Baldur's Gate 3 portray it like this? I actually do not know, since I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm going really slow to really sink deep into it, but I do hope that once I get a glimpse of it, that
so many opportunities for adventure.
What I want it to be and more. Oh, I think it is also important to mention that one of the reasons why this city has somewhat exploded in population has a lot to do with the tolerant nature of its people when it comes to who they allow into the city. Not every city in the Forgotten Realms allows just anyone to live within it, but Baldur's Gate, alongside other cities such as Waterdeep, are generally known to allow species such as, I don't know, drow, tieflings, half-orcs, and the like, as species that are generally frowned upon in other places. That is, of course, provided that they follow the laws, but that is a huge reason why the city has also grown up so much. But that's about it, really. There is just so much to talk about Baldur's Gate, but anything else, and I would have to delve really deeply into very specific things about the city that would mean I would just never finish. I think keeping it broad allows me to hit the most important factors, lest I end up making a, I don't know, Baldur's Gate series where I commit to like 5 videos to talk about the city, which I just cannot do right now. I just figured that you guys would want to know about the city, since of course Baldur's Gate 3 is doing great at the moment, and yeah, it's just a great city anyway.
It's a great overview, man. From that overview, you can really see how the city has taken shape based on like its location and its history, the people that live there, the events that happened, and how it's all just balanced out somehow. But ready to tip at a moment's notice, and it's just such a great place if you're looking for adventure. In an earlier video, I had checked out Sigil, the City of Doors, and that had a very similar feeling to this, although Baldur's Gate seems to be more of a miniature version of that, maybe a bit more easily manageable. And while I do understand the reasons for it, I don't think I can forgive Baldur's Gate for this discrimination against doggos. My good doggos need a good place to stay. I won't have this. Or maybe they allow doggos in Waterdeep. Waterdeep just seems like a much better place, although I guess we haven't really gotten to details of that yet.